This is one of the most harrowing cases of child murder I've ever heard. Sylvia Likens was born into a disadvantaged family in Indiana. Her parents were travelling carnival workers and they didn't have much money. In 1965, Sylvia's mum was jailed for shoplifting. Sylvia and her sister ended up being placed in the care of a family friend. This was Gertrude Bazanowski. Sylvia's dad had offered the woman $20 a week to straighten his daughters out. Now, she already had 7 children of her own and also didn't have much money. One week, Sylvia's dad's payment to Gertrude was late. Gertrude decided to punish Sylvia. She dragged her into a room and tortured her with a paddle and a belt, while her little sister had to listen on outside. Sylvia's dad actually sent the money a day later, but things would only get worse. Gertrude started to regularly beat the girls. Sometimes when she was too tired, she would make her own teenage daughter Paula join in. On one occasion, Paula hit Sylvia so hard she broke her own wrist. Horrifically, Gertrude started beating Sylvia and telling her sister if she didn't join in, she would be next. Over an agonizing 3 months, Sylvia was force-fed until she threw up, forced to eat the sick, had her fingers burnt, she was used as an ashtray, she was forced to lick dirty nappies, and had salt rubbed into her wounds. She was given scalding hot baths until she passed out and then had her head banged against the wall until she regained consciousness. All of this abuse was subjected to her by Gertrude and her children. Now, there are some details about what they did to her that I just can't include on a TikTok video. On one occasion, Gertrude's children, along with help from other children in the local area, used a heated needle to tattoo some words onto Sylvia's stomach. The words were to the effect of, "I'm an S worker and proud of it." Sylvia spent so many months in this house being absolutely tormented. Just before she died, she actually predicted that she would. Now, Gertrude made Sylvia write a letter, almost to act as an alibi when she knew she was eventually going to kill her. She made Sylvia write about how she'd run away with some local boys. Heartbreakingly, Sylvia made a desperate attempt to escape, but was actually caught. Gertrude then encouraged a local boy called Coy to help her beat Sylvia to death. They striked her with a curtain pole and dragged her to the basement. Now, a neighbour actually apparently heard the commotion but just decided not to ring police. Sylvia's heartbreaking final words were that she wished her daddy was there. Gertrude ended up panicking and calling police. When they came and discovered Sylvia's dead body, she claimed that she found her like that. She gave police the letter that Sylvia had written about running away with the boys, but the police just didn't buy this story. Gertrude initially denied having any involvement in the death, and then she's decided to try and blame her children for it. She said that it was mainly her daughter Paula and the local boy. Gertrude ended up only being sentenced to 20 years in prison. She spent 8 years there before dying of lung cancer. Paula spent 8 years in prison for second-degree murder. 3 boys were convicted of manslaughter and given just 2 years.
Have you ever heard of Stephen Schulhoff? Stephen was living in Florida and he was taking care of his young daughter, Courtney. I don't know much about Stephen's life before all of this happened, but that's all I know is that he was taking care of his daughter. Courtney Schulhoff was his daughter. Now, different reports say different things. I read some places where she was 15 years old. I read some places that she was 16 years old. Either way, she was very young. And it seems like Stephen took pretty good care of her because he gave her access to credit cards and all of those things. But I'm also kind of getting the picture that maybe Courtney might have been a little bit troubled because he would eventually cut her off from his credit cards. And this really seemed to anger her. But when Courtney was just 15 or 16 years old, she met Michael Moran. And Michael had a criminal history and he was also 20 years old. So obviously her dad is not going to approve of this relationship. So at this point, it's February 2004, and not only is Courtney upset that her dad has cut her off from credit cards and all those kinds of things, she's also really worried that he is going to ruin her relationship with Michael. So Courtney decides to go to Michael and say that her father is hitting her and that she is afraid of him and wants to leave him. And she convinces Michael to come up with a plan to unalive her father. Here's where the story gets a little bit dicey because I don't think anyone really knows exactly what happened, but sometime during the night, someone went into Stephen's room and bludgeoned him with a baseball bat. Courtney and Michael had decided that they were going to try to hide the body by dumping it off a bridge near where they were, but instead of doing that right away, they got into Stephen's vehicle and drove into Orlando, which was about 20 minutes away, to get McDonald's before coming back to the apartment. Their crime would be undiscovered until 3 p.m. the next day when Stephen's girlfriend actually showed up to the apartment complex looking for Stephen, and that's when she found both of them in his apartment complex and called 911, and then Stephen was found. At first, Courtney told police that she had gone to take her dad's dog out on a walk, and when she came back, Michael was completely bloodied up. But later on, Courtney would change her story and say that she alone had committed this crime. But either way, Michael was tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Courtney was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole at first, but the Supreme Court would make a decision later on that sending children to prison for life without the possibility of parole was cruel and unusual, so her sentence was reduced to 40 years. She was only at most 16 years old when she committed this crime. Do you think that 40 years is enough, or do you think that she should spend the rest of her life in prison? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and follow for more true crime.
In the moonlight, my honey, I roam with the dawn.
It was the year 1991 in Austin, Texas, when this yogurt shop named I Can't Believe It's Not Yogurt turned from a haven of treats to a place of terror. 4 girls, Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, and sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, were thrust into a nightmarish narrative. As Eliza and Jennifer neared their working hours, Amy and Sarah arrived, hoping for a brief catch-up. Tragically, the innocent rendezvous became a scene of horror.
You don't ever think anybody's gonna come into a yogurt place and shoot you. I mean, and shoot you and all your friends. This just doesn't happen in a yogurt place.
All 4 were tied up, shot in the head, and left in the shop, which was maliciously set on fire, obliterating crucial evidence. Fast forward to 1999, the case took a dramatic turn. 4 teens, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Welburn, were suddenly in the spotlight. Springsteen and Scott confessed, but later retracted their statements, claiming coercion.
I cannot give you any more truth than I've already given. Where do we go from here?
Why can't you? Because you're going to dig yourself into that thing? Well, you're already there. You've already dug the hole. The hole's there.
Oh, then I'm in it. I don't know. That's what I keep telling you guys. I mean, my God, this was 7 years ago.
But this is one of the most significant things that ever happened in your
That's
life.
what I keep trying to explain to you. If I was there and I partook in this, I would remember these things.
And you do remember these things.
No, I don't. No, I do not.
You're the coldest guy I've ever talked to in my life. Are you a cold-blooded murderer?
No, sir, I'm not.
I think you are. I think Maurice is absolutely true about you.
Well, then
You're the coldest guy I've ever talked
need
to.
take.
Pardon me?
Then let's take whatever actions we need to take. If that's what you believe and that's where you think this case needs to go, then let's go there.
We don't want to go there.
Pierce and Welburn were soon freed due to lack of evidence, yet Springsteen and Scott faced trials and convictions, which were later overturned. A crucial piece of evidence, a DNA test from the victims, didn't match any of the accused, leading to Springsteen and Scott's release after 10 whole years. Attorney Amber Forelli, who worked on the case, points back to those 2 unidentified customers. According to her, they were the last in the shop, whispered amongst themselves, and left a lasting mark on witnesses. Their descriptions stated one with light, short, dirty blonde hair and around 5'6". The other person was much bigger. They both had large coats on, and one of the coats resembled an army fatigue jacket, and they reportedly drove a green car. John Jones, the case's initial lead investigator, remains troubled by the case. He's perplexed by the 2 unidentified men and believes their identification could be the missing piece. But until then, the haunting question remains: who were they?
Let's talk about what happened to 13-year-old Rachel Mellon Skimp. She was born on October 13th of 1982 and lived in Melrose Park in Illinois. At the age of 3, her parents divorced and her dad moved to Dallas and her mom stayed with her in Illinois. Eventually, her mom started seeing a man named Vincent, and eventually they got married and had 2 children together. Rachel was described as a bubbly person with a great sense of humor. She was the life of the party and was always the most beautiful girl in the room. On January 30th of 1996, Rachel was at school and was having a normal school day, and as the day went on, her friends noticed that she was crying by her locker, so they went to go ask what was wrong. She said she was having a problem, but that she was going to fix it herself, and that is all she said. The following day, on Wednesday, January 31st, Rachel decided to stay home from school because she was having a sore throat and was feeling kind of sick. So her mom left to work, and her stepfather was going to stay home because he wasn't working at the moment. Rachel called her grandma to thank her for the Christmas gifts that she had sent her, and this call took from 4 to 5 minutes, and her grandma said that this phone call was completely normal, nothing out of the ordinary, but she did notice that at one part in the phone call, Rachel was kind of quiet, and her grandma said, "Is he there?" referring to her stepfather, and she said yes, and then Rachel told her grandmother that she needed to hang up. Her stepfather stated that they played the Nintendo before she decided to go up to her room and take a nap. So once she was upstairs taking a nap, he decided to take the family dog for a walk, even though it was 20 degrees below zero. So he left at 2:30 p.m. and then ended up coming at 3 p.m. He said the reason that he took a while is because the dog broke free from the leash and he was not able to get him, so he just figured that the family dog would just find his way back eventually. At 3:15 p.m., Vincent's youngest daughter comes home and she goes straight to Rachel's room to greet her, and that's when she realizes that Rachel's not even there. So the youngest daughter tells her dad that it seems that Rachel is missing, that she's not even in her room, but he just doesn't seem to care. So once her mom gets home, the youngest daughter tells her that Rachel's missing from her room, so that is when her mom decides to call 911 and report her as missing. Stay tuned for part 2.
Today we're going to be talking about the tragic case of Ellie Gold. She was born on February 6, 2002 and lived in Wiltshire in the UK. In January 2019, she started dating this fella here. His name was Thomas Griffiths and they'd known each other since they'd been in year 7. Ellie's father had stated that he wasn't overly keen on him as he was very, very quiet and he didn't really talk that much. However, they just assumed that he was kind of shy and a little bit, a little bit timid. However, when exams started to approach, Ellie was more bothered about focusing on her A-level exams, so she decided to end it in early May. However, he did not take this well whatsoever. On May 3rd, 2019, Thomas was dropped off to school by his mother. On May 3rd, 2019, Thomas's mother dropped him off at college, but he then emailed his college tutors telling him that he was unwell, so he walked to Chippenham bus station and got a ride back home. His mother also returned home, however Thomas hid in his wardrobe so his mum would not discover him and find out that he'd come home from school. After waiting for her to leave again, he grabbed his car keys, got in his car and drove to Ellie's house. An argument had taken place with the two of them, and Thomas had had enough and he tried to strangle her. He then used a knife from Ellie's kitchen and stabbed her 13 times, all in the neck area. He then spent an hour at the crime scene trying to clean up all the blood and put some of his clothes that were covered in blood in a plastic bag. He washed his trainers in the kitchen sink and the knife, but then put the knife in Ellie's hand to make it look like she'd killed herself, even though he'd just cleaned it. He then used Ellie's finger to unlock her phone to tell her friend not to bother coming to pick her up as she wasn't well, she wasn't coming into college. He then wandered home, put his clothes in the washing machine and dumped the plastic bag. A neighbour of his then saw him coming out of the woods, which he gave him a lift back to school. He was then collected by his mother as if nothing happened. He then sent a text to Ellie trying to make an alibi, asking if she would meet him that day. And at 3 p.m. that day, Ellie's body was discovered by her own father. However, luckily, just 3 hours later, Thomas was found and arrested, as police had gathered evidence from CCTV cameras, and one of Ellie's neighbours said that she saw him outside her house. He also had marks on his face that were consistent with defence wounds, and as you can imagine, the coward denied involvement. but police managed to match the blood on his trainers to Ellie. On August 29th, 2019, he did actually plead guilty to the murder. And due to his age, which was 17 at the time, he was avoided a whole life tariff and was sentenced to 12 years in prison before he's eligible for parole. Whether or not he'll get out, what do you guys think?
She fell in love with her daughter and married her. This is Stephanie from Oklahoma, and I wasn't even looking for this story. I was researching something else, and I came across this, and I was like, clicking that link. So Stephanie lost custody of her kids when they were younger, and their paternal grandmother took over. Later, she got back into her kids' life, and then she says her and her daughter just hit it off. And this was after she married her son in 2008 and then got it annulled in 2010. She said that wasn't a actual, with an S, relationship. She just married him to get him out of the military. Don't understand how this works, but that's what she said. Now this son right here says he tried that mess with her, but he wasn't going for it. He denied her advances. DHS got involved. She was 44 here and she was 26, so I don't understand how this worked with the DHS. I don't know if there was a child in the home or what, but DHS got involved and they were charged with incest. They are now divorced. Well, the marriage has been annulled. Oh, and the mother said she feel like she didn't do nothing wrong because her name wasn't on her daughter's birth certificate. Honey, it's in the blood.
I was raped 6 times, had both my arms chopped off with an axe, and thrown off a 30-foot cliff, and what I did afterwards shocked the whole of America. My name is Mary Vincent, and I was 15 years old on that horrific night. I had just run away from my family home in Las Vegas, and was hitchhiking to Los Angeles. A 50-year-old man called Lawrence Singleton, who looked very friendly, offered me a lift. I felt so comfortable in his car that I fell asleep. But when I woke up, everything had changed. It was dark, and he was now driving in the opposite direction. The unease and fear rose up in me, and he told me we were going to stop at a motorway service area so that he could have a wee. The moment he left, I laced up my boots and ran off. Only I didn't hear him come back, and he hit me in the back of the head with a hammer, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was tied to the back of the van and Lawrence was raping me. This claver lasted all night, and in the morning, I begged him to let me go. To which he replied, "Okay, I'll let you go." He took an axe and cut off both my arms, then threw me naked and dismembered over a 30-foot cliff in the Del Porto Canyon. I miraculously survived, but I lost a lot of blood. However, a deep rage to live invaded me, so that this madman does not reproduce this to other girls. I pulled myself up the cliff without arms, and I walked more than 3 miles before arriving at the road. And if you want to know the continuation, press plus and comment Mary for part 2.
So it's okay to take the life of your offspring if you want to be with your lover. That's what this lady thought. Her name is Diane Downs, and I just got through watching a documentary about her. So Diane was married, had 2 kids with her husband. Her husband had a vasectomy. He decided that he don't want to have no more kids. But Diane said, I want more kids. She had an affair, then had her 3rd child, which was a boy by this affair. At some point, her and the husband do divorce, but not like when she got pregnant with this outside kid. Later, she gets a job as a postal worker and falls in love with her co-worker who is married. He's cool with like having relations and stuff, but he tells her, I don't want to be with you. I don't want to have kids with you. I don't want to be the stepfather to the kids that you already have. So Diane tries to convince him that she's the one for him for like 2 years. And then she decides that, you know what? If he don't want to be a father or a father to my kids, then I'll just take their life. Took them down the road outside of town and fired at each kid, taking the life of one of the daughters. It was the daughter who testified in court and said, yes, it was my mother who did this to us, even though the mother had tried to lie and say it was this carjacker that she tried to help on the side of the road. She's giving interviews and everything, and even gets pregnant by a reporter, which is what you see right there. But they still sent her to prison for life plus 55 years. This one was crazy. Have y'all heard of this one? And what are y'all watching or have watched in documentaries? I need recommendations.
Let's talk about what happened to 14-year-old Ava Wood. Ava was from Baldwinsville, New York, and she was on the 9th grade honor roll list, and she was the MVP of the JV girls soccer team. On January 20th of this year, around 8:30 a.m., Ava's mother had called the police department asking if they could do a status check on Ava because she did not show up to school that morning. She stated that Ava was at home with her father, and her father was depressed, and she stated that the night before they were on the phone together, and he had said, "This is how it ends for us." Ava's mother had given the police officers a key to get into the house, and when they got into the house, they saw Ava and her father in 2 separate bedrooms. Both of them had gunshot wounds, but the father's wound was self-inflicted. This is a very devastating case, and we may never know why Ava's father did this to her. Many prayers to Ava's family and friends during this very tragic loss.
In the UK, there are a total of 70 people that have been handed a whole life tariff. Now, if you're not from the UK or you're unfamiliar with the term whole life tariff, let me explain it to you. A whole life order or a whole life tariff is a sentence where you will not get out of prison, where you will die behind bars. So when you hear a sentence of someone being given 25 years to life, that means they will get out after 25 years. They will not spend the rest of their life in bars, unless you are given a whole life order / whole life tariff. And I thought in this new series we could go through every single one of them and talk about why they are absolutely deserving of the sentence that they were given. Starting off with the first person to ever receive a whole life tariff in the UK, John Straffen. Not only was he the first person to receive a whole life order, he was also the longest serving British prisoner after having spent 55 years behind bars up until his death. In 1951, at just 21 years old, he was convicted for murdering 3 young girls. On July 15th, 1951, he strangled 6-year-old Brenda Goddard in a woods. The police had actually questioned him about this murder after finding Brenda's body, to which he said he was in the woods, but he didn't kill her. There was also no evidence against him, so he was released. A few days later, he then came into contact with 9-year-old Cicely Batstone at a Forum cinema in Bath. He got speaking to her and he was able to coax her to go to another cinema with him where they were seen catching a bus. And again, he then strangled Cicely, killing her. Now, police had actually picked him up and arrested him on totally unrelated charges. But in his cell, it was here where he confessed to the murder of Cicely, claiming that he sat behind her and it only took a couple of minutes until she was dead. He was arrested for both of these murders and then sentenced to trial, where he was found unfit to plead due to being insane. And he was actually sentenced to a mental hospital after this. But unbelievably, on the 29th of April 1952, he escaped by jumping over a wall. And in that time period of 4 hours where he had escaped and that he was free, he killed again. And this final victim was 5-year-old Linda Bowyer. Now, because Linda had been strangled in the time period that John had escaped this mental hospital, the whole of England and the police force put 2 and 2 together and just presumed that John had did it. And that's kind of the verdict that we're led to believe today. His involvement in her death is still kind of a mystery, but let's be honest, it's highly likely that he was involved in her death. After being recaptured, Strafford was found guilty again and was actually sentenced to be hanged. However, this was then thrown out due to the fact that John Strafford was deemed insane and not responsible for his actions. Now, back then it wasn't called a life sentence, it was said, "till his majesty's pleasure be known," which nowadays is just a whole life tariff. And on the 19th of November 2007, John Straffen passed away behind bars where he belonged.
This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 p.m. and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.
After bringing 2 beautiful little girls, Aria and Bella, into the world, Michael Fontanelle and Jennifer Zeledon filed for divorce. From the outside, the divorce seemed to be pretty difficult, but the 2 of them shared joint custody and lived just about 2 blocks from each other, which I would imagine was great for both of the girls. Both girls attended a local Catholic school as well. At some point after Michael and Jennifer went their separate ways, Michael began dating a woman named Hannah, and the 2 of them eventually moved in together. I should note that Hannah's legal name is Bunneck Landon, but she goes by Hannah Landon, or Bunneck Lim instead. Now, given that Michael and Jennifer shared joint custody, Bella and Aria spent a lot of time with Michael and Hannah. Things were rocky between Hannah and Jennifer and her family. However, on Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, just about a week ago, Michael Fontanelle woke up and Bella, now 6 years old and in kindergarten, and his girlfriend Hannah were nowhere to be found. At 7:30 a.m., he walked into the Harahan police station to report them both as missing. Aria, who is 7 years old, was at the house, so he was definitely freaked. Michael reported Bella and Hannah as missing. Police officers opened a missing persons investigation, and they went to Michael and Hannah's house on Donnellan Drive, where they began searching the neighborhood for both Bella and Hannah. At about 8:30 a.m., stuffed inside of this 10-gallon chlorine bucket, in the mother's front yard, was the body of the beautiful 6-year-old Bella Fontanelle. With the discovery of such a horrific thing, a full-scale homicide investigation was immediately launched. Neighbors along the mother's street gave investigators access to their security cameras.
This 14-year-old boy S.'d his 83-year-old neighbor. Viewers' discretion is strongly advised. On August 29th of 2018, 14-year-old Tyrone Harvin told his 83-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Mae Neal, that he would help her with some chores inside of her apartment. Before walking into her apartment, he made sure to grab a handful of condoms. Tyrone did help Dorothy with some chores before attacking her with a lamp. After that, Tyrone S.'d her, he fled her apartment, and he left her seriously injured on the floor and naked. Neighbors had asked police to do a welfare check on Dorothy since they hadn't seen her around for a couple of days. When officers showed up at her apartment, they noticed dried blood on her doorknob, and that's when they saw Dorothy lying naked on the floor. She was then taken to the University of Maryland Hospital Trauma Unit and unfortunately passed away that next day. When officers were at Dorothy's home, they noticed that there was several condom wrappers around her body as well as used condoms. A broken, bloodied lamp was also found by officers. Dorothy's autopsy revealed that she suffered extensive trauma to her head and genitals. There was DNA on Dorothy's body and in those condoms, and that DNA matched up to Tyrone. Despite all of the evidence, Tyrone's mom stood by his side and truly believed that he would never do something like this. On June 29th of 2022, Tyrone was convicted on first-degree murder, first-degree SA, and use of a deadly weapon. Tyrone was also sentenced to life in prison.
This couple were eaten alive by a grizzly bear, captured on harrowing video footage. It was October 2003. Timothy Treadwell was a 46-year-old grizzly bear enthusiast. He famously claimed that he felt more at home in nature with the bears than in normal human society. He spent a total of 13 summers in Alaska's Katmai National Park, documenting the giant creatures. He would stun people by how close he got to the giant animals. He said the animals understood him and that there was a mutual respect, and he would even occasionally wrestle with the baby cubs. Park rangers, though, were warning Timothy about how unpredictable the animals could be. This was what Timothy lived for, though. He seemed very willing to take the huge risk of getting up close and personal with these beautiful bears. Now, Timothy began to get complacent. On one occasion, he even left food open inside of his tent. Rangers had to warn him not to do this. Now, in the autumn in question, he was actually with his girlfriend Amy at the park. Now, they usually only stayed for the summer, but this year they were there much later into October. Bears are known to be a little bit more anxious and antagonistic this time of year as they are preparing for hibernation and food supplies are less. On the 5th of October, Timothy and his girlfriend were due to be picked up. They were getting a plane out of the national park, but when the pilot turned up, they were nowhere to be found. Near the campsite, the pilot stumbled upon something terrifying. A human rib cage lay on the floor. Park rangers were called and they were met by a terrifying bear. It tried to attack them, so they killed it. Human remains were later found in its stomach. They were the remains of Timothy and Amy. Timothy's video camera was later recovered from the campsite. The camera had captured the couple's brutal death. The audio from the camera was rolling and it picked up Timothy screaming that he was being killed out here. Amy then shouts at him to play dead and then encourages him to fight back. Tragically, they were both eaten by the grizzly bear.
My brothers burnt me in the oven when I was just a year old, and the reason will surprise you. I'm Jazura Thompson, and with my family we lived in Texas. On 16th of November 2015, my parents went out without us as usual, leaving me and my twin 3-year-old brothers alone in the flat while my grandmother lived in the same building. They went out to buy pizzas and get some medicine from the chemist. About 10 minutes later, one of my brothers picked me up and put me in the kitchen oven. He closed the door and my other brother turned the oven on full blast. I started screaming in pain and calling for help, banging on the oven door. My brother saw me in pain and tried to get me out of the oven, but they knocked it over. With the door pressed against the floor, my mother smelled something burning. When she came in and saw my 2 brothers crying and pointing at the kitchen, she ran to the oven, and by the time she got me out, I was already dead from the burns. When my brothers told the investigators why they had put me in the oven, they were shocked. They told the investigators that they did it to do what Mom does when she cooks. Subscribe to support me.
Have you ever heard about the Campbell family murders? Darren and Kimberly Campbell met in Lansing, Michigan. They were both working as legislative aides at the state legislature, fell in love, and got married. Between 1996 and 1998, they had both of their children, Colin and Megan Campbell. Kimberly decided to be a stay-at-home mom at this point, and Darren continued to work. So it seems like Darren liked to job hop. He worked in many different corporate positions and executive levels, originally stationed in Texas, and then they moved to Florida. This is where things get crazy. So the Campbell family had money. Just for reference, they were renting a mansion from retired tennis player James Blake for $4,000 a month, and that was just their home. And then the children did attend a private school as well. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Megan would be going to school with bruises on her body. This was kind of strange. People were starting to take notice of this. There seemed to be a different amount of tension in the household than there ever was before. And then on May 7th, 2014, Darren did the absolute unthinkable. A 911 call would be placed from a neighbor explaining that the $1.6 million mansion was completely on fire. When firefighters arrived, they found out that Darren shot his wife, his son, his daughter, and then turned the gun on himself before burning his mansion down. Now the question is why? These 2 children, super well liked in their community. Apparently, Kimberly had just gone on a weekend trip with her girls, and while she was hanging out with her girlfriends, she was explaining, there's a lot of issues in my marriage right now. Now, there's a ton of speculation about financial issues. Like I said, Darren liked to job hop, and he also liked to live fancy. Was he way far over his head with money? Colin was getting ready to graduate high school and go to college. Was he panicking because he couldn't pay for tuition? Megan was a competitive cheerleader. Did he not have the money to support that anymore? Friends would flood Twitter and Facebook with amazing messages for Colin and Megan. There was a trending hashtag for them. They were 100% so loved and so missed. Darren and Kimberly's family were completely shocked. And since they're all 4 dead, we'll never really know the exact motive. Why do you think Darren killed his family?
On this day, January 15th, 1947, 22-year-old aspiring actress Elizabeth Short was found brutally murdered in Los Angeles by a woman who was out walking with her child. The press dubbed Short the Black Dahlia, and her murder quickly gained notoriety due in large part to the extremely gruesome and violent nature of the crime. Elizabeth Short had been cut in two at the waist and completely drained of blood. Some of her organs, including her intestines, had been removed and placed underneath her body. Pieces of flesh had been cut away from her thighs and her breasts, and the autopsy showed that her stomach was full of feces, leading investigators to believe that she had been forced to eat it before she was killed. Most famously, though, the killer had sliced each side of her face from the corners of her mouth up to her ear on both sides in what is known as a Glasgow smile. And if you've never heard of a Glasgow smile before, it's essentially what the Joker looks like, but real. After the discovery of her body, the LAPD launched an extensive investigation. However, after going through over 150 suspects, they still failed to make any arrest. Elizabeth Short's murder is often cited as one of the most famous unsolved cases in the US and is also the oldest cold case in Los Angeles County.
This is me when I was 21 years old, and I was given a 100-year sentence for something you could never conceive. My name is Paul Ferguson, and I grew up with my 15-year-old autistic brother, Timothy Ferguson. It appeared to the outside world that our relationship was typical. However, my brother starved to death in 2000. When found, his body weighed 69 pounds. The police were alerted, and they started questioning us. It was not long until I admitted to abusing my own brother. I used to shackle him to prevent him from moving. I used to occasionally submerge him for longer than 9 hours in frigid water. Along with many other things, I used to make him climb and down the stairs till I told him to. However, I did this because my mother told me to, not because I wanted to. You see, I obeyed my mother in everything, aside from abusing her, because I wanted her to think well of me. I denied him food as well. Thus, we ultimately perished. Since I followed my mother's instructions in every way, I begged the judge for pity, but he wasn't convinced by me. He claimed that, although my mother was deeply regretful of what I had done, I wasn't truly apologetic. Consequently, my mother received a life sentence, and I received a term ranging from 30 to 100 years in prison. Think either of us deserve to be sentenced at...
This is what we know about the awful case of 16-year-old Shelby Benny. Shelby was a cheerleader at Bixby High School, and on Thursday night, her family was on their way home with her dad behind the wheel. He had reportedly been drinking, and according to her mom, they were also having a heated argument up in the front seats. At 70 miles per hour, he tried to pass another vehicle in a no-passing zone, and their SUV flipped. As we know, Shelby was tragically ejected from her family's vehicle on impact. A bystander immediately ran over to the scene, but there aren't even words for what happened next. Shelby's father was reportedly standing disoriented just outside of the crashed car, and when asked if anyone was hurt, he ran away. He left his 16-year-old daughter there to die on the pavement. Now, according to police, they were able to determine that Elliot had fled to a local family-owned business, and it was there that he got access to another car. They were able to electronically track that vehicle, and within 12 hours, they found him behind the wheel in a town about an hour away. It was obviously too late to give him a DUI test, but he was taken into custody. With Elliot's arrest, we know that while he tried to tell police he skidded on an oil spot, he's also admitted to taking a few swigs of the vodka bottle that was found in the front seat. Today, Elliot is charged with first-degree manslaughter, but he has already posted his $100,000 bail. And as for Shelby's mom and her siblings, again, unfortunately, we don't know how they're doing now. Shelby is described as a bright light with a heart of gold and the best teammate you could ask for. If you would like to support her family during this time, the link will be in my bio.
Let's talk about what happened with 22-year-old Leslie Palacio. Leslie was born on May 5th of 1998, and she was living in Las Vegas, Nevada. Leslie loved to help others, and she was currently working as a phlebotomist. On August 28th of 2020, Leslie wanted to have a fun weekend out after completing her lab assistant program, so she was going to try to get some of her friends to go out with her, but obviously they were still kind of worried and scared because of COVID still being fresh. Leslie ends up getting this Instagram DM from 25-year-old Eric Rangel Ibarra, and he was basically asking her if she wanted to go out that night. They were actually very close family friends, and his mother actually was Leslie's godmother. Eventually, Leslie agrees to this, and she tells her sister that she is going to be texting her throughout the night. Around midnight, they enter this casino/hotel, and this is the security footage that they did arrive. Around 4:40 in the morning, Leslie ends up sending a text message to her sister, and when she texts her, her sister didn't know that this would actually be the last text message she would get from Leslie. That next morning, Leslie's family realizes that Leslie never made it home, and they're not too worried right now because it's still the morning. Maybe, she's hungover or whatever, and maybe she's just hanging out with Eric. So they wait till the afternoon. Still nothing, so they decide they're going to go to Eric's house since, they are good friends with his family and just kind of find out what's going on. Once Leslie's family gets to Eric's house, they notice that the whole family is basically taking out furniture, and they're basically asking if they've seen Leslie, and they kind of acted like they didn't know that Leslie went out with Eric that night, and basically no one knows where Leslie is. On August 30th, Leslie's family reports her as missing. Then on August 31st, Eric's family reports him as missing and his father as well. Obviously, this is kind of strange. Why would Eric and his father be missing? Luckily, a neighbor of Eric had a security camera facing right in front of his house, and it actually shows when Eric arrives. It's 6:05 in the morning. It is showing Eric helping Leslie out of his truck, and she looks visibly drunk, and he's just trying to help her inside of the house. It's now 7:25 in the morning, and Eric is seen taking out Leslie's body, and his father is actually helping him, and Leslie's body is wrapped in a bedsheet, and they just throw her in the back of his truck. Next, the father is seen cleaning off the driveway with a hose. The police department gets a warrant to search the house, and when they go inside the house, they notice that there is cleaning supplies everywhere. I'm running out of time, but stay tuned for part 2.
You committed the ultimate act of betrayal, leaving your baby terrified, alone, unprotected, to suffer what I heard was the most gruesome death imaginable.
If you haven't heard about this case yet, consider yourself lucky because it is so sad and disturbing. In June of 2023, this mother left her toddler alone in her house while she went on vacation. 16-month-old Jalen was left alone in the house for 10 days while her mother went to Detroit and Puerto Rico. When she arrived back home, Jalen was no longer breathing, so she called police. Jalen's cause of death was dehydration and starvation. And recently, she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, and this is what she had to say.
Candelario spoke through a translator, saying both God and her daughter have forgiven her for what happened.
He was found dead on the streets of Spain with all of his organs missing. In this photo is a young man named Loic Goudard, and he was only 19 years old. Now this story takes us back to July 1st, 2018, and we're going to the beautiful island of Mallorca in Spain, but specifically to an area known as Magaluf, which is known for its beautiful beaches but also for its nightlife. Now on July 1st of 2018, Loic was found around 4 a.m. outside of a hotel, and he had clearly been deceased. And with very little to no investigation, Spanish authorities said that he had chosen to take his own life. But what was very odd about where he was found is that this hotel was not the hotel he was staying at, and immediately his family did not believe what the police were telling them. So at the time, Loic had gone on his vacation with his friends, and this was the first time he had traveled by himself. Now the reason his friends and family did not believe that he had chosen to take his own life was because he had so much to live for. He was known to be a happy kid, he had a girlfriend back home, and he was also planning on taking over the family business back in France. There was also a strange discrepancy found about 150 euros taken from his bank account the night before he passed away, which didn't make sense to his friends and family. Why would he take out money if he was planning on taking his own life? Eventually, his body was released from Spanish authorities and sent back to France. But in 2019, a separate autopsy was done of Loic by French coroners, which required his body to be exhumed. And when they did this, the coroners were absolutely mortified to discover that there were no organs inside of Loic's body. Both his heart and his spleen were missing, amongst other organs. But even stranger, the Spanish authorities and the Spanish coroners never reported this in any of their documentation. French authorities then requested to be able to go to Spain in order to conduct their own investigation. But as you can imagine, they were denied access. Now, because most of his organs were missing, his family began to think about what could have possibly led to this. And their immediate thought was that their son had been a victim of underground black market organ trafficking. But to add to the long list of suspicions, 6 other people were reported as passing away that summer, all of which were on the same island and under very similar circumstances. And on top of that, all of these people had passed away on their first day of vacation. And each time police looked into this, it was quickly ruled as them having chosen to take their own life. But to this day, we have absolutely no idea what actually happened to Loic on that night.
You guys hear about this YouTuber who was kidnapped in Haiti and held for ransom? On March 14th, Addison Malouf, also known as Your Fellow Arab on YouTube, was kidnapped in Haiti after he traveled there to interview one of the most notorious gang leaders who goes by the name Barbecue. He's pretty much known for traveling to the most dangerous parts of the world and documenting his experiences. But when he arrived to Haiti, he stayed in this empty hotel and planned to drive 6 hours to the city of Port-au-Prince, where the streets are completely ran by gangs. This is the last video he took before he was taken by a gang and was held for a $600,000 ransom.
We leave right now. We'll get there while it's dark. It's about a 6-hour road trip. We'll get there while it's dark, and that place is completely run by gangs.
It's so dangerous to go to Haiti right now, and the fact that this guy went for a YouTube video is pretty crazy. But apparently, he was released yesterday, and then he posted this on his Instagram story saying that he was okay.
There has been an absolutely horrific murder this week that was live streamed on Instagram. This case is extremely disturbing, so please be warned before watching. On Friday, 12,000 people watched a Bosnian bodybuilder kill his wife on Instagram Live. 35-year-old Nermin had been abusing his wife during their marriage, and the pair had a young child. On Friday morning, he took to Instagram Live to tell his followers that they could witness a live killing. Absolutely horrifically, he turns the camera to his ex, whose face is completely covered in blood and disfigured. He calls her a derogatory name and blames her for her own death because she reported him to police. Disturbingly, you can hear the child crying in the background. He then tells his followers that he's the child's father and his ex had hidden the toddler from him for over a week and reported him to police for DV. So, in my opinion, yes, she's taking steps to keep her and her child safe from you. After shooting his wife in the head on Instagram, he then goads his followers saying, "Someone come and save the child." A police chase then began and he went on a shooting rampage. He continued to film and tells his viewers that he's killed 2 other people who actually turned out to be an innocent man and his young son. He also wounded a police officer, another man and a woman while on the run. He ended up unaliving himself on the same day.
Have you ever heard of Don Fluitt? Don was a wonderful person. He had 2 separate marriages. The first one ended in divorce, but there were 2 children from that one. And then he married Christine. They also would go on to have another child together, a little girl. Don absolutely loved being a father, and he would spend any extra time he had with his children. When I say Don was a good person, I mean he was a good person. I'm sure he had his vices like the rest of us, but Don even created a spaghetti Sunday where he got together with a bunch of his friends and they made just a ton of spaghetti to feed to the homeless. This became a really big thing, and it was his brainchild. Don lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and eventually Don and Christine would split up, and this would start a custody battle between them for their daughter. On December 29th of 2016, Don's daughter was trying to get a hold of him, and she was unable to. This was very worrisome for her because she would always be able to get a hold of him. So she called some of his co-workers to see if they would go check on him, and when they arrived at his house, they realized that he was passed in his garage. The investigation started immediately, and police were able to tell that Don had been beaten with a blunt object. A knife had been used on him. But it seemed like there wasn't enough blood at the scene, and so police started looking through his home, and that's when in the washing machine they found towels that reeked of bleach. So it was pretty obvious that somebody had tried to clean up. There were several suspects immediately. One was Don's brother, also his landlord. But the suspect that stuck out was Terry White. Now, this is Christine's new husband. So, Dawn's ex-wife Christine, her new husband Terry. He was a suspect. Police did interrogate him, but his alibi checked out. He said that he had gone to work and everything looked to be completely normal. But DNA evidence would come back. Under Dawn's fingernails was Terry's DNA. That's when police issued an arrest warrant for him. They did have to search for quite a while to find Terry, and when they finally did find him, he was in a parking lot trying to off himself. They did stop this, and that's when they arrested Terry, and Terry basically confessed. He told them things that the police had never made public and that only the killer would know. But that wasn't all that Terry said. Terry implied or said that Christine had told him that he needed to take care of Dawn because he needed to protect his stepdaughter. There was a custody battle going on between Dawn and Christine, and it really seemed like Christine wanted to just take Dawn out of the picture so that she could have full custody of her daughter. So then Christine was arrested. But the kicker to all of this is Christine was eventually bonded out. The judge gave her a personal recognizance bond and had her dad supervise her via telephone calls. Like, he had to call her to supervise her because he lived all the way in Oregon. She was in Arizona. But they let her out and eventually dropped the charges completely because the only evidence they had was Terry saying that she was involved. So she might have gotten away with unaliving someone completely. Terry was eventually found guilty and sentenced to 42 years in prison, but to the very, very end, he said that he was innocent and he did not do it. He didn't even apologize to Dawn's family, saying he was not going to apologize for an unaliving he was not a part of. So what are your thoughts on this case? Let me know down in the comments and follow for more true crime.
Today is a good day. This woman, this Ruby Frank from 8 Passengers, has finally been arrested. Now, if you've got no idea who this person is, she and her husband had a YouTube channel called 8 Passengers, and it was a family YouTube channel, but this woman was just horrible to her children. For example, she made one of her children sleep on a beanbag for months. She took away the child's privilege, as she called it, of having a bedroom. She also sent one of her children off to wilderness camps. If you don't know what wilderness camps are, they're like a thing in America for some reason where this child had to spend, I think it was about 6 months in the desert in his underwear. She also sent her 5-year-old child into school without lunch because the child was old enough to pack the lunch herself. And she quoted in this video, she hoped no one stepped in and gave this child a lunch so this child would learn the consequences of his actions. Overall, she just don't sound that nice. There's lots of other things that she's done over the years. She's just... If you want to go and find out more, go and have a look. She has been arrested because of child abuse charges, because police found one of her children extremely malnourished with duct tape on their extremities and with open wounds. Yeah. And the fact people knew about her behaviour towards these children for years, and it had to get to this level for her to finally be arrested and for police to do something is disgraceful. The child in question also climbed out of the window to go and get help. And do you know what that reminds me of? The Turpin family. And if you don't know who the Turpin family are, go and Google them. This was happening in front of our eyes. In front of our eyes. I also just want to share this. This is from Sherry Frank, I think, which is one of Ruby's daughters. They've shared this to their story confirming this. And they also mention that if you have any sort of clips, questionable clips from the 8 Passengers account, send them to her. So I'm putting this on here in case any of you guys do, go and help this girl out. I'm sure there'll be more to come out on this story and I'll keep you updated. And, bits and pieces will probably get changed about, but I just really wanted to share the good news because, oh...
Don't watch this video alone. What would you do if you thought the house you were looking after was haunted? I love a Reddit mystery and this one gives me the creeps. It starts, "Hey guys, I'm looking for some advice because I'm really not sure what to do. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think the place that I'm house sitting at is haunted." Okay, backstory. My friend told me about this service that places you with rich people who need their houses looking after. You basically get a paid holiday to babysit their multi-million-pound mansions. So I signed up and got an offer to look after a place in Slovenia. I didn't know this at first, but you don't even get given the address to protect the owner's privacy. You just get picked up and taken there. Now, I'm a bit freaked out because I'm being driven through the dark woods with no other houses in sight. So the driver drops me off and I'm given like a checklist of rules and things to do around the house. Like I'm supposed to be barefoot at all times. Not no shoes, which I would get, but completely barefoot. It was a bit weird, but I was like, whatever. It was kind of giving foot fetish, but I just shrugged it off. At first it's really fun. You kind of feel like you're a princess in a castle. I was so tired after the trip though, I really just wanted to get some sleep. I went round, checked all the doors were locked and went to bed. In the morning, I woke up and I went downstairs to go and get some breakfast. That's when I saw it. The front door was wide open. I'm thinking, I know I locked it, but maybe there's a trick to it that I missed. So I shut it and locked it again, and this time I put the chain across. I went to the kitchen to get some breakfast, and that's when I started hearing noises, like something was moving upstairs. I'm thinking, big old mansion in the woods, maybe it's the house settling, or maybe it's the pipes. I couldn't quite shake it though, so I decided to go upstairs. I called out and the noises stopped, which actually freaked me out more. The next bit is really creepy. I picked up this sculpture to use as a club and I headed upstairs. I checked every room, locking each door as I went. Nothing had been disturbed though, so I decided maybe I was just freaking myself out and I went back downstairs. That's when I saw it, this little duck toy. It definitely wasn't there before and all the doors were locked. I was so freaked out, I didn't know what to do, so I called the emergency number of the groundsman. He basically laughed it off until I told him about the duck. He went really quiet and told me to go into a room and lock myself in until he rang back. I'm in my room now, but I'm really freaked out. I think I should leave, but I don't even know how to get to the airport. I'm only supposed to be here for 2 more days, but I don't know if I can stick it out. What do you think? Should I bail or should I stay? If you like this story, you'll love the new BBC series of Wreck on iPlayer. For me, it's the perfect mix of horror and mystery.
Was this man killed by a ghost, or was he scared to death? This is Christopher Case. Christopher grew up in Richmond, Virginia. While he lived there, he became a radio DJ. Christopher was the kind of guy that kind of kept to himself. He would much rather stay home and listen to music than go out and socialize. Christopher would also take supplements religiously. He took them every single day, and he worked out all the time. Christopher got an opportunity for a new job in the music industry, and he was going to be a music executive of some sort. And this would make him move from Virginia all the way to Seattle, Washington. And again, Chris just kind of kept to himself. People didn't bother him. He didn't bother people, but he did keep in touch with his friends and family back in Virginia. In April of 1991, Christopher went on a business trip to San Francisco. It was here that he met a woman. Now, this woman was attractive, she was bubbly and just energetic, and they had a lot in common, especially when it came to music. But this woman was 20 years older than Christopher, and there was a little bit of a long distance thing going on, so Christopher really wasn't interested. But this woman, who was unnamed, made it very clear that she was very romantically interested in Christopher, but he rejected her, and this seemed to anger her. After Christopher rejected her, she was really upset, and she told Christopher that she was a witch and that he would be gone within 1 week. Now, Christopher wasn't the religious type, so he kind of blew this off at first. But when he got back home to Seattle, that's when he started calling his friends, and these were really strange phone calls. The first few days home, Christopher blew it off and seemed to forget about the incident, but on April 14th, he called his friend Sammy and said that he had woken up in the middle of the night and heard voices coming from somewhere in his apartment, but he was unable to find where the voices were coming from. He also told his friend Sammy that he felt like someone was watching him all night long, even though he lived alone. On April 16th of 1991, Christopher called Sammy again and said that he had been attacked during the night. He said that he had woken up to the feeling of somebody on top of him and like he was being strangled, but there was nobody there. He said that this entity had then picked him up off his bed and thrown him back down. And when he woke up in the morning, he had cuts on his fingertips and there was blood all over his bed sheets. All of this was getting to be a little bit too much for Christopher, so he decided to go to a religious bookstore, and there he picked up a whole bunch of crucifixes and also text on how to deal with evil entities attacking him. When Christopher got home, he would set up these crucifixes all over his house, and he even took salt and poured it all over his house, trying to protect himself. He also took meticulous notes on how to protect himself from this evil entity and put them all over his home. Not quite a week had gone by since his trip and his encounter with this woman, but it was one night the attacks from this invisible entity became so intense that Christopher actually left his home and went to stay the night at a hotel. His friend Sammy was unable to get a hold of him the next morning, and this prompted him to call police and do a welfare check. But when police got to the apartment, Christopher wasn't there, so they just kind of left. Christopher would call Sammy again that day, but this time it was different. In the past couple of days, every time they had talked, Christopher seemed just terrified. But this time when they spoke, he seemed almost calm, like he had accepted what was going to happen. During this phone call, Christopher told Sammy that the night before that this invisible entity had almost killed him, and he was absolutely convinced that this was going to be his last night on Earth. Sammy would find out later that that same day after he spoke with him, Christopher would go visit a Catholic priest and get advice from him, and then go back to the religious bookstore to see if there was anything else he could do to defend himself. On April 17th of 1991, police would find Christopher in his home. He was deceased. He was in his bathtub, leaning inside the bathtub with his head leaned against the wall. The official cause of death was listed as myocarditis, and I might have said that wrong, correct me, but that was his official cause of death. But like I said in the beginning, Christopher was a very healthy individual. He worked out religiously and he took supplements all the time. But there have been some links of myocarditis and those supplements maybe being connected in some kind of way. But there are also some theories that think that maybe this curse was real and Christopher was literally killed by a ghost. But then there's other theories that state that maybe Christopher just started to believe that this curse was real and convinced himself so much that this was real that he literally scared himself to death. But either way, this is a very interesting case, and I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments, and follow for more true crime.
These 5 men have vanished after boarding a submersible to visit the Titanic. Last Sunday, 5 people boarded a submersible, which is kind of like a submarine in Newfoundland, Canada, but has lost contact with the operator only 1 hour and 45 minutes into the trip. The Titan was built for tourists to visit the wreck of the Titanic, which is located 12,400 feet underwater. It has 96 hours of oxygen available, which means that the people inside will run out of oxygen by Thursday. The Titan can reach 13,123 feet underwater, and it's operated using what looks like a modified game controller. The 5 people who boarded the Titan are known to be wealthy businessmen as well as a 19-year-old boy. But what's interesting to me is that everyone had to sign a waiver accepting that this submersible can potentially cause their death. The Titan only started taking people down in 2021, and it's been reported that there's been so many issues with this process. And keep in mind that it's not cheap to do this excursion. Everyone paid $250,000. Nevertheless, I hope the Titan is found and everyone is brought back home safe.
So I know I introduced myself to you earlier, but my name is Detective Bates, and this is Sergeant Tobler. We're just here to talk to you about kind of a few things involving your kids. So first, do you live down here, or? Or do you live up north? Do you want to talk to me about where you live or how many kids you have?
Is it just me, or is this clip so eerie? She's literally just looking into the police officer's soul and will not say a word. When I look at this footage, I can't help but think about all the other cases I've seen when people commit murder and then are taken to get interviewed by police, and the blank stare they usually have where there's like nothing in there. That's what Ruby is really giving right now.